Hello, everyone. Today, on A Winter of Discontent, we will be discussing national conservative socioeconomic grievances. We'll begin by explaining their gripes with globalism, liberal urban culture, the technocratic experts and administrative state, the PMC class, and the quote unquote elites more broadly. We will then talk about some important texts that seek to explain these national populist grievances, why national conservatives believe we are in a quote unquote state of emergency, and then discuss the liberal critiques of these grievances. Finally, we will end on a discussion of merit and meritocracy and how that's shaped right-wing populist grievances and their ideological competitors. National conservatives today are framed by a quote, us versus them divide on various issues, where they believe that some sort of establishment group or established view is exploiting or unfairly hurting the people or a more subservient group. The most obvious example is their belief that national sovereignty is under attack by what they describe as quote unquote globalism.
Yeah, the national sovereignty globalism divide is definitely one of the more salient positions that the national conservatives tend to hold. And it's definitely one of the most salient grievances of all. It manifests in a lot of different ways on both sort of a more macro level of being sort of upset at the idea of the nation having its sovereignty undermined through multinational treaties and stuff like that. And it also goes down to a more sort of macro level of the nations is not only being undermined internationally through like the UN or the EU or the WTO, it's also being undermined by massive hordes of people coming in. From their view, they say that illegal immigration is an assault on the nation, and the nation is built on this homogenous society. And if you don't have a homogenous society, you don't have a nation. And this sort of connects with a lot of other anger that they have, especially towards the elites. And because they think the elites, don't like the idea that the nation is homogenous, they maybe don't even like the idea of the nation, and that they're really trying to almost replace the native population by bringing in like groups of foreigners in order to create a multicultural state, which is something that the national conservatives believe is bad, and that they believe is like a deliberate conspiracy done by the elites to replace the native citizenry with one that's going to be more compliant to the will of the elites.
Yeah, as we can kind of see, this sort of like when it comes to immigration, at least, this concern by national conservatives over like what they call open borders or too much mass migration is very like nativist and sometimes conspiratorial and pretty, racist and xenophobic, to say the least. And I think maybe the other the open borders globalist policy that a lot of national conservatives fret about, as Jackson touched on, was like their concerns over like free trade and open trade, which they would say that free trade policies have unfairly punished a lot of developed countries and their industrial bases at their expense and in favor of more developing countries like China, who have flooded the Western countries with a lot of like cheap manufactured goods. And the elites who are in favor of free trade agreements are basically continuing the further destruction of their industrial heartlands. And this is why there needs to be more closed economy or more like tariff or protectionist based trading system.
Yeah, speaking of those elites, anti-elitism is a big through line that you can sort of trace all throughout national conservative ideology, or at the very least, if it's anti-elitism, it's against a specific kind of elite. This is kind of like the urban professional, socially liberal elite who lives in a city, and they're contrasted against the conservative, usually rural people who are seen as kind of being more authentic representatives of what the country actually is. And you see a lot of conservatives complain that, they're sort of normal America, almost like a moral majority America that just wants to live their life and, wants to live within a coherent country, but you have all these liberal elites in Hollywood, in the media, in government, in academia, and business, and they don't want to cater to normal people. They want to push their ideological agenda. They want to, I don't know, make movies where the main character is like a girl with magic powers, who's also black and trans and disabled. Like they want to do that rather than cater to what normal salt of the earth regular Americans want. Uh, Now they don't usually grapple with the idea that many of these elites who live in cities, they're also citizens of the nation, and they're kind of expressing many of their own views that just happen to be different. They would say, well, being part of the nation isn't just having, a slip of paper that says you're a citizen. It's about believing in like national values. And so, yeah, sure, maybe those liberal elites are American citizens, but they're not really Americans. They don't support the things that make America great. And they're trying to make America into just a worse copy of Europe or of, communist Russia or some other state because they hate the country because they're not Americans.
Yeah, I think for a lot of national conservatives, their views, like as Jackson said, there are these like cultural institutional centers of power, right? Like schools and academia and Hollywood and maybe like woke corporate businesses that are like in a very nefarious way trying to push their very narrow views that are not very representative of what the majority of people believe. And these are very socially liberal views. Like maybe some examples of these views are like, very pro-gay marriage or LGBT rights,
They'll get
trans
it
rights.
eventually.
Exactly. We'll figure it out. Maybe very pro-feminism, very pro like diversity or multiculturalism, very pro-immigration, very secular, pro-CRT or DEI, all of these things they would say. And this is where they would say, again, going back to the whole like national conservatives don't think institutions are neutral sort of thing, is they would say like, look, these centers of power are de facto like molding people's minds and what they believe, right? Because they monopolize these cultural centers. And it's not fair for the majority of people who are more conservatives in their mind, who are basically being tricked. And I think maybe one quote to sort of illustrate where these like liberal coastal urban elites kind of looking down on these conservative views and just basically thinking in a few years time, they'll come around to our views eventually, is this like quote by former President Obama about how a lot of rural conservative people, quote unquote, like cling to guns and religion. He said in a speech, quote, and it's not surprising that they get bitter. They cling to guns or religion or antipathy to people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations. So we sort of see like what national conservatives point to as this like looking down on like condescension towards the conservative rural people at the hands of a liberal elite who are just trying to socially engineer them to be like copies of them.
Yeah, I think the Obama quote's especially interesting. Like he really was, if you look at so many scandals, like or so-called scandals in the Obama administration, it is funny. A lot of them revolve around the idea that Obama's supposed to be some sort of elitist who hates regular Americans. There's like the tan suit thing. Like, well, who does he think he is? He thinks he's too good to wear a normal black suit. He thinks he's some sort of socialite from Europe. The whole ordering Dijon mustard on a hot dog thing. People got mad at him for that. They're like,
Yeah.
there's, I think, a Sean Hannity bit on Fox News about it where he's like, Mr. President, real Americans use yellow mustard. And I don't know where Dijon is, but frankly, it just shows how little you care about the people and how little you understand them. Here in America, we use Heinz yellow mustard, which, if that shows how bad the Obama administration was, then man, I wish we could go back to stuff like that. But kind of going off of that, another thing that's related to the anti-elitism thing, but perhaps slightly different, is the dislike of the sort of technocratic, bureaucratic elite represented by the administrative state and most specifically by government bureaucrats. And the contrast that national conservatives will put between them and, the real American people. And this like manifests itself in many different ways, from like complaints about, federal government's bureaucrats don't understand local issues and they're making things too hard for us to do at the local level. Complaints that like, oh, these like, tree-hugging, bleeding heart bureaucrats want to give a bunch of money to USAID, and they want, it doesn't matter if we don't want to send our money overseas, all these, like, nerds with their calculators who all live in DC want to give all the money to like starving Africans or something like that. They get mad, immigration policy. These technocrats say we need to bring in immigration to fuel the economy, but all it's doing is, stealing jobs from hardworking Americans. They think federal bureaucrats tried to like socially engineer society through, welfare, education, housing, DEI, affirmative action. It's like the idea that, these elites in government think that they're better than the common people. They think that the common people are rubes and like don't know how to manage their own affairs. And they ultimately want to control the common people and manage their lives. Like, I don't know, like their characters in like The Sims or something like that.
Yeah. Moving on then to another one of these divides that national conservatives point to is one between what they would call like the professional managerial class, or PMC class, versus the working or like blue collar or small business class. Another way to think of this is the divide between the college educated class and the non-college educated class. So national conservatives are pretty critical, very scathing in their criticisms of the professional managerial classes, college educated class. These are the people who went to college and ended up getting jobs, white collar jobs. I don't know, they're marketing people or program manager. They have titles like that, basically.
Don't forget the hated HR professional.
Oh,
The most evil of all the PMC classes.
Right. They hate the HR lady, basically. So that's the sort of thing they're pointing to, is like, we don't like this class, and we're in favor of this small business, working class group of people who actually do real work. So farmers and industrial workers and small business owners actually make things, they produce things. And meanwhile, this PMC class, they just sit around all day doing like a fake email job. And they don't actually produce anything of value. And even worse, they think they're better than the working class people. They're like, you should just learn how to code, right? To, get ahead, right? And there's this sort of grievance we kind of see between a lot of the professional managerial class people who live in like coastal liberal areas. They usually live in, better socioeconomic conditions, better zip codes. They put their children in good schools. And they tell their kids to, go to college, and then after that, get a good job and things like that. And meanwhile, everyone else doesn't get to live in these nice areas. They have to deal with like things like deindustrialization, and don't have the opportunities to go to college, and don't have that upward mobility that the PMC class gets. And this sort of divide is what NatCons point to, and they say, the elites, the coastal liberal PMC elites, are like ripping off everyone. They're getting fat, like doing fake jobs at the expense of everyone else.
But this whole thing contributes to a big anti-elite sentiment, which is where the populist attitude of the national conservatives really comes through. This whole thing, everything we've been saying before this, with the anti-government workers, the anti-globalization, anti-PMC, this all comes into this idea that the elites are lying and that they're tricking the people. It's in sort of us versus them dichotomy, and that us versus them framing can essentially be applied to the entirety of NatCon understanding, both from their view of how a nation functions, who belongs in a nation, how to treat political enemies, just how to conduct politics in general. It's, you have your group, and what you have to do as a member of your group is ensure that your group succeeds at the cost of another group. And so that's where this sort of like populism comes from, this anti-elite sentiment. And these two things sort of are mutually reinforcing to each other. There's also this belief that the elites are subverting the will of the people. Like, we live in a democracy, but it does seem that, whenever the people have a problem with something that the elites like, that thing's never going to go away. The elites, they say that everyone, is equal under the Constitution, but in reality, they just, manipulate the government to benefit themselves, and that they just use the administrative state to basically just run the government regardless of what Congress thinks.
Yeah. So there's this idea effectively that there's us, the people, right? Especially the working people, the non-PMC people. We're just trying to, push our way. We just want sound government policies, right? But there's this nefarious, more liberal, college-educated elite in the coastal cities, especially, who keep on pushing down policies we disagree with. Another one that we can point to is maybe like immigration. That's the other one national conservatives point to a lot. Those like we want to restrict illegal immigration. We've been wanting to do this for decades, but the administrative state does not listen to us. Our congressional leaders don't listen to us, and something has to be done about that, right? And I think maybe from here we can point to some specific examples that a lot of national conservatives point to, of like elites being unaccountable to the people. One they'll say is like the Hunter Biden like laptop story, where they'll say like this was an important scandal. Hunter Biden's laptop was found just a few days before the 2020 election, perhaps with incriminating stuff on it, but the media elites basically suppressed the story and wouldn't let news outlets wouldn't publish anything about that, because they wanted Biden to win the 2020 election. The other one I could think of is the lab leak suppression. Basically, the theory that COVID was actually from like a lab in Wuhan, China. They had leaked out, and this got popular in a lot of conservative spaces in 2020. And they would say mainstream media news outlets suppress that theory, because they thought that, maybe it would look like it looked racist or something like that. And then it did emerge, I think a few years later. I think the CIA said like it was one of the more likely causes of COVID was some sort of connection with a lab leak. So they would say, like, look, see, the liberal elites once again suppressed the will of the people and suppressed the truth, right? Because it wasn't convenient for their narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of just is all like, is sort of anecdotal, but it does go to show that there is this sort of real feeling among national conservatives that the elites really just like are not, not only are they not like politically accountable to the people, they also just at a very basic level don't respect them, or frankly don't like them and just think that they're stupid, which is in many ways just as aggravating as the belief that they politically don't listen to you, because at least if they maybe morally respected you, that might be a little different. But there are a lot of different works of political theory based around sort of this like anti-elite sentiment, because it's become a very sort of popular mode of analysis these days. Muhammad has already mentioned Patrick Deneen's Why Liberalism Failed.
Yeah, I can jump in right here. Deneen basically argues that uncontrollable forces, he says that liberal modernity has unleashed mainly the administrative state and the market, which have expanded, as Jack said, into local socioeconomic conditions, local economies, traditional ways of life, and have overrun those things, leaving communities broken and devastated. I guess like free trade is like the most obvious example of the market expanding everywhere, a globalized market that's destroyed local economies, he says, and like the administrative state has moved on everywhere, into all aspects of society, regulating everything from the most minute things to the most important things. So that's this feeling that there's these uncontrollable forces that have been unleashed that the people don't have any control over, again, fuels this populist sentiment that those elites don't care about us. And then moving on, there's another book that was written, this is again more favorable to right-wing populism. It's called National Populism, The Revolt Against Liberal Democracy by Matt Goodwin and Roger Eatwell. They argue why national populism, or like right-wing populism, has become more popular lately. They say that there is a coherent national populist revolt that has emerged amongst the masses against elites who are upset about how these elites have promoted like antithetical cultural values, and that this is not just some one-off thing. It's not just because of like 2008 recession or post-COVID something or an immigration surge. This is a long-running cultural revolt against the elites, and it's here to stay. They basically argue that it's not just simply like a working class revolt against capitalists. It's not just like propaganda by like business elites to like trick people into fighting each other over immigration. This is like a long-standing, long-rooted socioeconomic and cultural sort of revolt. And they say it boils down to like four historic shifts or D's, they say. One is distrust amongst the people against the elitist nature of liberal democracies. People believe they no longer have a voice. The second is destruction, the fear amongst many that immigration or ethnic change is destroying the nation's identity and way of life. Three is deprivation, the fear of relative economic decline because of globalization and neoliberal economics. And four, de-alignment, weakening of bonds between mainstream parties and the people, causing greater unpredictability in voting. So again, they point to these like long-standing sort of breaches between much of the people and the elites to explain why there's a revolt. It's not just like some one-off like exogenous shock.
Yeah, and so with all this put together, I mean, you have untrustworthy elites who don't respect the people. You have, rising anti-elite sentiment. You have an increasingly sort of, I guess, they would say despotic and authoritarian administrative state. All this, like, bodes pretty poorly for the state of the country. And so for a lot of national conservatives, they say that sort of we're in a state of emergency, and that one of the reasons why it's okay for national conservatism to be so harsh and at times almost authoritarian, and one of the reasons why that's okay is because of how bad things have gotten and how pernicious and evil the elites are. Because they're so pernicious and evil, we are justified in using more sort of statist methods of perhaps repression or social pressure. They dislike mainstream conservatives because they say they were the ones who were supposed to stop this whole process from happening, but look how bad things have gotten under their watch, oftentimes under their governments. Clearly they're not up to the task. National conservatives will oftentimes say that a conservative is just a liberal from like 15 years ago. All they do is at best slow things down, but they won't actually reverse the things that need to be reversed. There's also more traditional conservative concerns about sort of the idea that there is too much power in the government, and that essentially if you just ignore this and continue to claim that well, conservatives shouldn't use government power and we should do states' rights, this is just going to allow the liberals who do believe in big government to crush you. So you might as well crush them first by using the tools of big government against the system itself. And so this sort of goes into their whole belief of why it's okay to use these methods. After all, like, things are really, really bad in their view, so therefore all options are on the table.
Right. The liberals are destroying the society we love. The traditional conservatives are either too weak or complacent or basically bought off to do anything about it. So what a lot of national conservatives think is there needs to be some sort of like almost Caesarian figure who can cut through the decadent liberalism and restore the country to the right path.
A lot of NatCons end up supporting January 6th. Some will claim that, the election was stolen or that January 6th didn't even happen. Others will claim it did happen, that it was actually good and that it should have succeeded. But by and large, they tend to believe that, the liberal elite were so evil that they actually tried to steal the 2020 election. They actually did it successfully. So therefore, that justifies violence on the part of the right wing, who now need to take the country back, potentially with military force, if the elites won't surrender things peacefully. Now, jumping to the liberal critique of all this, because I think it is fair to mention, reasons why a lot of people don't believe this. There's many different ways the liberals will critique this and many different avenues they'll come from. One is that they'll say, well, you guys claim to dislike these government employees and these elites, but in many cases, these are just like very intelligent people or very hardworking people who came to the places where they're at because of merit and hard work. Sure, there's some nepotism, but we're against that just as the same as you. And we want to create a society where people, through their own hard work, can get to where they are. And just because someone's an elite doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. And that also sort of the anti-pluralism or the anti-diversity is, they would say, a complete mistake. Not only in many cases where they say it's immoral, since it's based on racial animus in the case of more than a few NatCon thinkers, but they would also say that it's, it's making the country better. It's making America more unique, creative. It's helping us outcompete other countries. And that these sort of attachments NatCons have to ethnicity, to family, to religion, this is all like kind of backwards. And also, you're allowed to do this stuff anyways in a liberal society. They say the problem with NatCons is that instead of being willing to share America with everybody else, they want to force their own particular version of America onto what's in reality a very diverse nation, and that there's no way to do that without sort of going to these unjustifiable lengths of authoritarianism.
Yeah, and just kind of adding on to the whole like diversity is our strength. Yeah, I know that's a little bit of a meme in some places, but the liberals would argue like, look, if you have only one intellectual perspective, for instance, things are stale, you won't innovate, you won't change. But if you have many different perspectives, you'll be able to choose from the best among them, right? And therefore we'll be able to, innovate and outcompete, alternatives. And this maybe being shifted to the last criticism that liberals have is this whole idea of like, you NatCons claim there's this massive state of emergency, right? But is this really a state of emergency? Is it really just self-justifying or self-fulfilling? Like if NatCons say that extra democratic means are needed, to be resorted to in order to restore the proper state of the nation, and then they start using those extra democratic means and they cause democratic backsliding and all sorts of other chaotic activities, then aren't you causing the chaos you seek to prevent in the first place? So this would be another one of the critiques that liberals have. And I think from here, maybe we should turn finally to our discussion. And we're going to have a little bit of an interesting discussion here. We want to talk about merit and meritocracy and how it factors into the societal divisions and hierarchies that we talked about earlier, those clash between like PMC and working class and things like that. So we want to start off a first question here. I'll ask you, Jackson. Do we think that merit creates conditions of conflict and its own societal problems? And like, what does that portend for democracy?
I feel like this depends a lot on who you ask. Like there's a lot of different everybody claims to respect merit in one form or another, but a lot of people will disagree on what exactly is or, isn't meritorious behavior, or what should be counted within merit and what doesn't count. So yeah, disagreements about merit can absolutely cause, social conflict, because it's really what merit really is a sort of proxy for the question of fairness of, do you think that the correct people are getting the correct rewards or the correct punishments for their actions? Even if people will be like, well, I don't really believe in that. Sounds kind of harsh. I don't really believe in that. It's like, well, you kind of do. I mean, like all societies really believe essentially that, regardless of whether we say humans are created equal or not, we don't necessarily believe that everyone should be treated exactly the same. We recognize there are smarter people, there are faster people, stronger people. We also recognize that there are more moral people. What's kind of changed over the years is what factors we think are relevant in making that distinction. In the Middle Ages, they would have said it's your birth. Are you a noble or are you not? Perhaps during the 18th or 19th centuries, what race you were. Certain races were said to have higher mental qualities or mental faculties than others. In America today, it's usually, honestly, like how much money you make is oftentimes used as a proxy for merit. And so we still do have these debates, and the sort of distinctions and the differences between the views of what merit is sometimes why these conversations feel so fraught and why people get so upset when they have them, especially when they feel like something unfair is happening.
Yeah, I think this discussion of merit is super interesting because it really goes to the heart of what it means to like the heart of like what should American society be based around. It asks us questions of fairness, but also equality and inequality, right? Like, is this country a country of equal outcomes? Is this a country of equal opportunity? Does everyone really have a fair chance here, right? The whole American creed is based on this idea that everyone has a fair shot here, but is that really true? What is a fair shot, right? And I think maybe there are definitely, it's like Jackson, there's like these different perspectives based on obviously what political ideology you have. I think for a lot of like liberals who are more like centrist, especially, they would say that, a meritocracy is essential for fairness. It's a core American value, like meritocracy in the classical sense. Like if you work hard and you get a good education, you should be ahead. Like those college educated people that NatCons were, making fun of and saying we work fake email jobs, they work really hard. They're very intelligent. They're very smart. They got ahead, right? Because of their hard work. So they deserve to maybe perhaps have the benefit of being looked on favorably for their hard work. They deserve a certain level of dignity and respect for that. And if you didn't take that initiative in life, didn't take that ambition in life, didn't go to college and stuff, well, I mean, should we really respect you as much as someone who did go through that hard work? Like that is a question they would ask. When it comes to unfairness and lack of merit in the American system, they might more point to the vestiges of old unfair privileges. So they might point to white supremacy or patriarchy being the big problems against merit. Those are unfair biases in favor of small groups of people, certain groups of people, like patriarchy in favor of men, white supremacy in favor of white people. I don't know, Jackson, we could talk about like the leftist view of merit, maybe. I think you might
Yeah,
be a little more
I mean,
experienced on that.
no, well, as sort of I was saying like before, you do have these different factions in society with very different understandings of what merit is and what is like meritorious behavior. And I think one big divide that we see a lot, especially if you're look on the left, is you'll see the kind of gap between, I guess, like liberal and leftist views on merit. Because leftists, I think, are a lot more suspicious of the concept of merit than liberals are,
Mm,
who will often liberals oftentimes say, well, merit's the perfect system for distinguishing who ought to get what, because it's based on their personal kind of moral virtue or personal character or willingness to work hard. Leftists tend to complicate this view by saying, yeah, well, you can say that, but in reality, merit kind of covers up a lot of things. A lot of people who we say are meritorious, they had a lot of advantages in life. Like, okay, you say Elon Musk, maybe he has merit. Well, he also came from a family that already had a lot of money to
yeah.
begin with. And so, he had the opportunity and the funds, study in different parts of the world and to, start his business. And, sure, maybe he did work hard, but there could be a person who worked way harder who just happened to be poor and who
Mm,
never had any of those opportunities in the first place. So a lot of leftists would say merit is really a smokescreen to obfuscate like class divides. In reality, whether you succeed or fail in life is, from their point of view, has a lot less to do with whether or not you're personally meritorious versus like whether you got lucky in the circumstances of your birth. Were you born basically like a rich white family or like a poor like POC family essentially?
yeah, I think a lot of leftists will also expand on the liberal critiques of existing privilege too, and say, it's not just that we need to start dismantling, a patriarchy or dismantle white supremacy. These are deeply rooted systems of oppression that systematically hold down people, and this is why you can't have a sort of, I don't know, equality of opportunity that a lot of liberals will push for, or just say like, look, if you work hard, you might be able to get ahead, because people are systematically held down if they're in marginalized groups. And they would extend this to capitalism too. If you're in the working class, you're systematically held down by the capitalist class. So you don't have the same, no matter how hard you work, as Jack said, it won't matter. You won't be able to get ahead. The playing field is stacked against you effectively. And seeing the differences here between the liberal and leftist view is very interesting. The leftist view, in some ways, might even be more similar to the national conservative view, saying that there's like this rigged system, right, that systematically pushes down a certain class of people. For the leftists, they'd say the capitalist class and the white supremacy patriarchy is pushing down working people and minorities and marginalized people, while the NatCons would say there's a PMC liberal elite urban class pushing down rural working class blue collar people, right? These are both structures of oppression in some sense that are pushing down a class of people. Liberals might accept that there are still some vestiges of these older patriarchy or white supremacy class, but they would seriously question the unfairness of the systematic unfairness of the capitalist system, or the systematic unfairness of like the whole PMC working class divide. So we kind of can see that maybe liberals are more about equality of opportunity. Let's give everyone a fair shot. There are some unfortunate systems that are blocking this equal opportunity. But if we just remove those things, we'll be okay. While leftists and NatCons are a little more systematic in saying like the whole problem is the system is rigged from the start. And
Yeah,
maybe equality of outcomes, perhaps, especially for leftists, is more important than equality of opportunity.
yeah, that's very interesting too. And I guess like you drew an interesting contrast between liberals and leftists, and an interesting similarity between leftists and conservatives. Something that I think both of them would resent having to hear that they're similar in any way. But like conservatives would say, yeah, we love merit actually. But guess what? We don't
Mhm.
have real merit in
Mm.
this country because, just like the leftists say, there are systems of oppression. But where we differ is we think the systems of oppression are aimed at white people, at men, and at people who express conservative views who aren't being taken seriously, or who are being, reported to HR, who are being kind of systematically put down.
Emily
In
from HR is putting down the
Emily from HR is personally persecuting me,
yeah.
and since she's an agent of the PMC. But no, this is sort of a almost like bizarro world alternate view of the leftist perspective, which is, yeah, there are these systems of oppression. It's just that, I like the people who you say are the oppressors, and you like the people who I say are the oppressors. It's almost like we just hold reverse views, but have the same kind of fundamental worldview. And so they would say, real merit, it comes from, working with your hands, building something, creating something. That's why there's sort of this like cultural fetishization of, blue collar jobs, or of, farmers, especially the idea of like the rugged yeoman farmer, despite the fact that most American farmers are massively dependent on the government for keeping their businesses open. And the fact that, if we're going to talk about like working class people, it isn't really white guys in hard hats at this point. It's a lot more, diverse, frankly, in terms of both the people in the working class and what the working class even does. They're not like pounding steel in a factory anymore. A lot of them are, I don't know, working in grocery stores or in Starbucks.
Mm. No, and those are interesting points here. It really is something too, because conservatives previously, when they were less national conservative, more like limited government, free market conservatives, would definitely be more similar to the liberal view, in that like, just if you work hard, you'll get ahead. Although they would be even more radical in that, and they would say like these systems like white supremacy and patriarchy aren't really holding back people. That's not thing. If you just work hard, if, you bootstrap your way up, right, like a sort of Friedmanite view of things, you'll get ahead. But I guess things have changed, as we've seen with the populist revolt. There is one other sort of view on merit we wanted to kind of briefly discuss, and this is from former American historian Christopher Lasch, and he sort of takes a different view than all the others. So Jackson and I are a bit of Laschian fanboys here.
Yeah,
And
exactly. So I apologize to the audience for the next few minutes.
yeah, but we want to just briefly explain what he thinks. I guess I'll start off here. So like Lasch argues that this concept of merit and upward mobility we see today is very strange and very unique. In previous times in history, in a feudal sort of system, medieval Europe, think like that. There was no concept of upward mobility, right? You were born a peasant and you'll die a peasant, and there was no expectation of going up or down, right? And you didn't have to feel bad about that either. There is no problem with the lack of dignity being at the bottom. Like a lot of NatCons are upset by how the PMC look down on the rural working class people, especially. And those people therefore feel a lack of dignity, right? And Lash would say, well, back in the day, those people wouldn't feel that because they were never expected to become part of the PMC or move ahead. They were not expected to move up. The problem today is that with industrialization and capitalism, now everyone wants to make the American dream. Everyone wants to move up. But unfortunately, by definition, 50% of people must be in the lower half and 50% of people must be in the upper half. So what this means is widespread resentment is caused, especially when people think they can't move up. I think, Jackson, you're probably a bit more knowledgeable about this Lashing critique than me, if
Yeah.
you want to continue.
I think what he's also saying is this isn't really a question necessarily entirely about economics, although it is certainly economically related. It's really more a question about how you have and maintain a democracy. Because fundamentally, if the idea behind a democracy is that all citizens are equal politically and they should all be kind of commonly consulted in terms of what policies get put in place by the government, or what course of action the state takes. If we believe that, then we need to have kind of a universal baseline of respect for all citizens.
Yeah.
And so he says this is why you know fears, both real and imagined, of sort of like social inequality are really, really damaging for democracies in a way that they're not damaging for non-democratic states. I mean, if you're living in a dictatorship, then naturally, of course, the dictator and his friends get more stuff than you. That's just how it works. But in a democracy, if you're supposed to be equal to the president, technically, as all American citizens are supposed to be politically equal to each other, then, well, any sort of big symbol of, wealth inequality or of social disrespect becomes a lot more galling because it goes against what's technically on the books as being true in the country. And so what Lash is really saying is we need to really rethink how we distribute respect in this country. And merit is not the best way in his mind to distribute respect in a democracy, because as Muhammad said, not everybody can be meritorious, or even if everybody does show merit, you're being judged relative to the merit of others. There's going to be exactly some people. Most people in the United States probably work very hard in their lives. There are some people who probably don't, but I would imagine most people do. But there's always going to be somebody who works harder than you, always somebody who, is trying extra hard, or is, gonna go apply for that job that you didn't want to do, or is gonna work the extra hour. Yeah, exactly, gonna do the extra internship, or is gonna stay and work later. And the question is, there aren't that many of those people, but they do exist. And if we decide to give them everything, if we decide to identify them as special and give them, grant programs, scholarships, we fet them socially and say that how wonderful and spectacular they are, well, where does that leave everybody else? Technically those people are politically just like everybody else in the country, but they're not treated as such. And that's going to make them angry, and that's going to make them resentful, and it's going to make them, start to question democracy. So Lash instead is saying, we need to sort of reestablish a common culture of respect for everybody, regardless of what jobs they do. We need to kind of go to a more communitarian understanding of, how society ought to be organized. We need to really put, kind of limits on how much wealth even people can get, and also sort of ensure that everyone feels that they have a stake in the country and that they're not just being ignored because of someone who thinks they're better than them.
Yeah, I mean, just think about how much the way I think about it, think of it is how much you resent the like LinkedIn post people who are always bragging about everything, right?
I'm so excited to start this new position. I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to have been a part of the team.
Right, and then everyone else feels bad because they're not as good. By definition, there'll always be someone like, who's above and beyond. So that's the way I think about it. But no, thank you, Jackson, for explaining that. And I think from there, we should wrap up the episode. Thank you everyone for listening. This was our episode on national conservative socioeconomic grievances. Next time, we're going to talk about something very different. We'll be talking about Francis Fukuyama's End of History essay, which we think will be very interesting and a good break from national conservatism. I think we're a little tired of that now. Good to get a break.
We're going to take a break from NatCon stuff for, at the very least, the next few episodes. But don't worry, we'll probably talk about them sometime in the future.
Yes. So with that, here's Mohammed Kazurnian signing off on A Winter of Discontent.
And this is Jackson Meiser signing off, and we'll see you all next time.